My cheating wife froze in shock when I calmly said, "Our marriage ends by Friday." What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world betrayed you? Well, that's exactly what happened here. But what he did next? It'll shock you. Stay tuned to find out how this heartbreaking story unfolds. You won't believe the twist at the end. I first began to notice the cracks in my marriage when the little things, the small inconsistencies, started piling up like a snowball gathering speed, tumbling down a mountain. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just overthinking. After all, we'd been married for nearly a decade, almost 10 years of shared memories, laughter, and even struggles that had made us a solid team. I thought we were invincible. But somewhere in the past few months, things had started to shift. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing that screamed cheating or betrayal, no, it was much subtler than that. And that made it worse. Jenna, my wife, had always been a woman of ambition, a successful marketing executive, always driven and always a little distant when it came to unwinding. I understood that, even respected it. I never minded the long hours, or the late night calls from clients that sometimes stretched into the evening. She was the kind of person who worked hard for everything she had, and that was one of the reasons I fell in love with her. But lately, something felt off. Those late nights became more frequent, and her excuses started to feel rehearsed. At first, it was just Wednesdays and Fridays, just work and drinks with the team. She'd say, always with that casual tone that, in retrospect, now feels so calculated. The first time I questioned it, I pushed the thought away. I told myself she was just busy. After all, I wasn't perfect either. I had my long hours at work, too. But as the weeks went on, the pattern was undeniable. The texts started coming later, working late again, or going out with the team. Every week, like clockwork. No spontaneous fun with me. No Saturday mornings spent with coffee on the patio, or long walks in the park on Sundays. Those were our rituals, our time together, but it was disappearing fast. And every time I tried to ask about it, Jenna would brush me off, telling me I was overthinking things. "David, relax," she'd say with a laugh. "You're imagining things. It's nothing. Really." But that's the thing when you've been married for as long as we had. You start to notice when someone's hiding something. The subtle distance. The way Jenna started looking at herself differently in the mirror. She began wearing new clothes, makeup that I hadn't seen her wear before, and even lingerie she would never model for me. When I brought it up, she laughed and dismissed it as treating herself. But I knew better. She was treating herself, all right, just not for me. It was as if she were slipping away from me bit by bit, and I couldn't get a grip on her. The emotional gap between us became even more noticeable. Where once we shared everything, now there were these walls. I remember one night, just a few weeks ago, sitting on the couch with her. It was a Wednesday, and she had come home late again. She was tired, distracted, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look at me. I didn't know what to say. She wasn't the woman I had married. She was someone else, a stranger, distant and unreachable. I turned to her and asked, "Is everything okay with us?" The question felt heavy, but she just stared at me for a moment, like I had just asked her about something entirely irrelevant. Her response? A quick, dismissive, "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" But it didn't sit right with me. And that was when I started noticing other things. She'd always been a little protective of her phone, but lately, it was like it was glued to her hand. I could see her tensing up whenever I got too close to it. Her messages? Always hidden, and sometimes she'd step outside to take calls, holding the phone to her ear like she was hiding something. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The way she acted, the way she moved, it all felt like a performance. A show I wasn't invited to be part of. But what could I do? Confronting her directly always felt like a losing battle. Every time I tried, she'd just laugh it off, like I was paranoid. Then there was the night I overheard her on the phone. She thought I was upstairs, but I had come downstairs to get some water. The soft laughter coming from the living room froze me in place. It wasn't just any laughter, it was the way she used to laugh with me. But now, she was laughing with him. She said something I'll never forget. "You always know how to make me smile." I stood there, gripping the railing at the top of the stairs, my heart sinking. The pit in my stomach grew deeper. It wasn't how she spoke to me anymore. It wasn't how she had ever spoken to me. And that was when I made the decision. If Jenna wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would find out myself. I reached out to a private investigator named Liam. The thought of hiring someone to spy on my wife made me sick to my stomach. But what choice did I have? I couldn't keep living like this, suspicious, uncertain, and paranoid. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt. Liam wasn't flashy. He didn't try to sell me on his services with fancy promises. He just gave me his business card, told me he'd find the truth, and that it was up to me what I did with it. I remember sitting in his office, the dim light casting shadows across his desk, the faint smell of cigars lingering in the air. It felt like stepping into a movie, but this wasn't some fictional story. This was real. My life was spiraling out of control. For the next couple of weeks, Liam would send me brief updates, cryptic texts, vague descriptions. At first, I hoped he'd come back empty-handed. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it in my gut. And then, the call came. "David, we need to meet. I've got the final report." I remember sitting in my car outside Liam's office, my hands shaking as I held the steering wheel. I didn't know if I was ready to hear the truth. I didn't know if I could handle it. But I had no choice. I had to know. When I walked into Liam's office, he didn't waste any time. He slid a folder across the desk, a folder that felt heavier than anything I had ever held. "Your wife isn't physically cheating," he said. My heart skipped a beat. For a second, I thought I could breathe again. But then, his next words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Not yet." I stared at him, stunned. He went on, telling me that Jenna was emotionally involved with someone else, Ryan, a colleague of hers. It wasn't just some casual affair, it was serious. I opened the folder and saw photos of Jenna and Ryan at a coffee shop, laughing, holding hands. They weren't just friends, they were intimate. They were planning something that would destroy everything I had built with Jenna. I wanted to look away. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. It was all laid out before me. The truth was staring me in the face. And I had to face it. The call from Liam haunted me all night. I lay in bed, the sound of Jenna's soft breathing beside me a stark contrast to the pounding in my head. The weight of the folder in my hands earlier that evening. The images of Jenna and Ryan laughing together so carelessly, so freely kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the realization that the woman I had spent nearly a decade with, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, had been living a double life. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to stand up and scream, demand answers, but part of me knew that doing so without proof would only make me look crazy. I had to be smart. I had to play my cards right. The next few days felt like a blur. Jenna went about her business as usual, not a hint of guilt in her demeanor. She was as distant as ever, but she wasn't showing any signs of the turmoil I knew she must be feeling. I watched her closely, every little interaction, every subtle movement, trying to read between the lines. It was like she had slipped into some other version of herself, a version that didn't need me, didn't care about me, but still needed to keep up the facade. The longer I sat with the truth, the harder it became to ignore the reality of it all. I was losing her, and yet, she was still here, in this house, in our bed. It felt like a lie I was forced to live in every day. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. But I had to find a way to confront her without losing my own grip on reality. I wasn't going to let her twist this into something it wasn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what hurt the most wasn't the affair, it was the lies. The constant drip of deceit that had built up over time, slowly eroding everything we had. She had been hiding something from me for months, and now I had the proof. But would she admit it? Would she come clean? Or would she lie through her teeth until the very end? That morning, I decided it was time. I couldn't wait any longer. The tension had been building inside me for weeks, and I was at my breaking point. Jenna had left for work, like she always did. She hadn't even looked at me when she kissed me goodbye, her lips brushing mine like we were strangers. I sat in the living room, staring at the folder on the coffee table, the same folder I had brought home from Liam's office. My hands shook as I reached for it, the weight of what I was about to do settling heavily on my chest. I wasn't ready for this. But how could you ever be ready to confront your spouse about the destruction of your life? I glanced at the clock. It was almost time. Jenna would be home in a few hours, and when she did, I would be ready. Ready to face her. Ready to make her see the truth. When the door finally opened, my heart was pounding in my ears. It was like I could hear every single breath she took as she walked through the door, as if the sound was amplifying the silence that hung between us. I didn't even look at her when she walked in, keeping my eyes on the folder in front of me. I wanted her to feel the weight of the moment. I wanted her to know, without me saying a word, that everything was about to change. David? Her voice was cautious, uncertain. She was trying to sound normal, but I could hear the hesitation in her tone. She knew something was wrong. She must have. Can we talk? I didn't answer her right away. I just kept staring at the folder, waiting. The seconds felt like hours. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until I finally looked up at her. I didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of me. She was still beautiful, still the woman I had married, but there was something different about her now. It wasn't the way she looked, no, it was something deeper. It was the coldness in her eyes, the way she avoided meeting my gaze. It was like I wasn't even there, like I wasn't even worth the honesty. Sit down, I said, my voice firm, not giving her a choice. I wanted to maintain control over this conversation. I couldn't let her spin this in her favor. Not this time. She hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward the folder on the table, then back to me. She slowly sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. For the first time in months, I saw her vulnerability, but it didn't make me feel sorry for her. It made me angry. Angry that she had taken everything I had given her, and thrown it away like it meant nothing. I had given her my trust, my love, and she had destroyed it. You know why we're here, I said, my tone cold, detached. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the best of me, not yet. You know what I know. Her face paled, and for the first time since I had started suspecting her, I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I wasn't going to give her the chance to lie her way out of this. Not again. I know about you and Ryan, I said, my voice low but steady. I know everything. She froze, her eyes wide with shock. David, it's not what you think. She stammered, her voice trembling. I swear, it's not. I held up my hand, silencing her. Don't lie to me, Jenna. I've seen the photos. I've seen the messages. I know you've been emotionally cheating on me with him for months. I know you've been planning to leave me for him. Her lips trembled, and her hands shook. She looked down at the table, unable to meet my gaze. David, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't help but scoff at her words. You didn't mean for it to get this far? Really? You've been sneaking around, lying to me, keeping secrets from me. And now you're telling me it wasn't intentional? She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't know what to do, David. I was confused. I didn't know how to fix things between us. I thought, maybe if I could figure things out with Ryan, I could fix our marriage. I thought I could feel something again. Her voice cracked as she said it, and I saw the depth of her regret. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. You thought you could fix things with him? I repeated, my voice rising now, the anger bubbling to the surface. You thought throwing everything away would fix things? You've been emotionally cheating on me for months, Jenna, and now you're sitting here telling me it was a mistake? How do you even think that's going to fix anything? I stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in the small space, trying to calm the fire burning inside me. I couldn't look at her anymore. She had broken me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, had shattered everything with a single decision. And now she was trying to make it sound like it was all some kind of misunderstanding. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. It was betrayal. And it was more than I could bear. Jenna was crying now, her sobs coming in quiet, broken gasps. I turned back to face her. And for the first time, I saw the woman who had betrayed me, sitting there in front of me, begging for my forgiveness. But it wasn't forgiveness she needed. It was redemption. And that was something I couldn't give her. You've already made your choice, Jenna, I said, my voice hard. And now, I have to make mine. Here comes the turning point. Will he confront her head on? Or will the past continue to haunt him? What choice will he make? The stakes are high, comment 1. If you think he'll stay, comment 2. If you think he's walking away for good. The conversation had barely ended when Jenna left the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving me in a cold, suffocating silence. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the truth I had just uncovered hung in the air like a storm cloud, darkening everything around me. She had finally admitted it. She hadn't just been working late, or going out with the team, she had been living another life. A life with Ryan. A life that didn't include me. I had always suspected something. But to hear her confirm it, to see the fear in her eyes, made it feel all the more real. I was crushed. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. And I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I sat there for a long time after she left. Time seemed to stretch and bend in that moment, the seconds ticking by like hours. My mind raced, replaying every word she had said, every detail that had felt wrong in our marriage. She said she didn't know how it got this far, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But I wasn't sure I could ever believe that. The truth was, I had been living in the dark for too long, swallowing the lies and pretending everything was fine. But now, there was no denying it. She had been planning to leave me. She had been emotionally involved with someone else. She had been preparing to tear apart everything we had built. As the silence pressed down on me, I could feel the anger building. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at her, to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. But I knew that wouldn't help. I knew I had to stay calm, keep control of the situation. I couldn't let her see how much she had hurt me, not yet. I had to be smarter than that. I had to show her that I was still in control, even if it felt like everything was slipping away. I stood up from the table, pacing the room, my thoughts swirling. What was I supposed to do now? I had already made my decision. The marriage was over. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so completely. But how could I confront her again? How could I force her to face the consequences of her actions? The thought of it filled me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She had no idea how much she had shattered me. She thought she could fix things with Ryan. But what did she think she was fixing? She wasn't fixing anything, she was just making everything worse. I walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. The streets were quiet, the lights of the city flickering in the distance. Everything felt distant. Everything felt like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Our life together had been a dream, or so I had thought. And now, it was crumbling. She had taken that dream, that life we had built, and destroyed it with a single decision. I didn't know what was more painful, the betrayal, or the realization that I had missed it. That I had let it happen right under my nose. I knew I couldn't let it go on any longer. I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay, that we could just work through this. Jenna had made her choice. She had chosen Ryan over me, over everything we had. And I had to make my own choice now. I had to walk away. But the thought of leaving her behind, of walking out on everything we had once shared, was almost too much to bear. The hours passed, and still, she didn't return. I stayed in the living room, staring at the empty space where we had once sat together, where we had once shared our lives. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from friends, emails from work, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered right now. Nothing mattered except the wreckage of my marriage, the pieces scattered across the floor, too broken to put back together. Finally, I heard the door open. Jenna's voice floated down the hallway, muffled by the distance, but I could hear the panic in her tone. She was home, and she was coming for me. But I wasn't ready to face her yet. I wasn't sure I ever would be. I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. When she entered the room, I didn't turn to face her right away. I kept my back to her, the weight of everything hanging between us. She stood there, silent for a moment, waiting for me to speak. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was racing, the anger and betrayal still simmering beneath the surface. She had betrayed me, but now, it was my turn to take control. It was my turn to make her face the truth. "You're still here," I finally said, my voice low and calm. Too calm. I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I saw the panic in her eyes. She had expected me to crumble, to beg her for forgiveness. She had expected me to fall apart. But I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't the same person anymore. "David," she started, her voice trembling. But I couldn't let her finish. I couldn't listen to her excuses. "No," I said, cutting her off. "Don't try to explain yourself. There's nothing left to say." She flinched, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the photos, the messages, the lies she had told me. I remembered how she had looked at me, day after day, with a coldness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She hadn't cared about me for a long time. She hadn't cared about our marriage. She had been planning her escape. "David, please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for it to end like this. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head. "It's too late for apologies, Jenna. The damage is done. You've already made your choice. Now, I have to make mine." And with that, I walked out of the room, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. But I knew it was over. It had to be. There was no coming back from this. No coming back from the lies, from the betrayal. I had to move on. I had to leave her behind. Because the man I was before, the man who trusted her, was gone. And the man who walked out that door was someone new, someone who would never let himself be broken again. The next few days were a blur. The conversations I had been avoiding, the confrontations I'd postponed, all came rushing in like a wave. I couldn't outrun. Jenna was still here, still in the house, but it felt like we were both just going through the motions. She tried to apologize, tried to explain, but her words felt hollow now. Her presence, once comforting, was now like an anchor dragging me deeper into the abyss. I couldn't stand the sight of her, not after everything. How could I look at the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had trusted with everything, and still see her as the person I once knew? She had broken me, and I wasn't sure how to fix myself. Each day felt like a battle. Every time Jenna spoke, I heard the same rehearsed lines, the same excuses she had given me in the past. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant for things to get this far. She said she had been confused. But every time those words left her mouth, they felt more and more meaningless. I wasn't sure I could believe her anymore. How could I? How could I ever trust anything she said again? The lies, the secrets, they had shattered the foundation of everything we had built. And now, as she sat across from me, eyes full of regret and desperation, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't really sorry at all. Not for me. She was sorry because it was falling apart. She was sorry because she hadn't been able to keep the charade going any longer. But deep down, I knew the truth. She was only sorry she got caught. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep pretending that we could just go back to the way things were. There was no going back. The damage had been done. I had seen the photos, I had read the messages, and I had heard her confess. It was clear now Jenna had been planning to leave me. She had been emotionally invested in someone else for months, and I had been blind to it. I had trusted her, believed in her, but now that trust was gone, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. I wasn't sure I even wanted to anymore. But even though the betrayal had cut me to my core, there was still a part of me that wanted to salvage something from this mess. It wasn't just about saving the marriage anymore, it was about saving myself. I couldn't let her destroy everything, not without a fight. I couldn't just sit back and let her walk all over me, let her walk away with everything we had built. I had to take control. I had to regain my power. The truth was, I wasn't just angry at Jenna, I was angry at myself for allowing this to happen. I had been so consumed with the idea of saving our marriage that I had ignored the signs. I had let her slip away without even realizing it. The night we had that final conversation, when everything came to a head, I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in months. I had known for a while that something was wrong, but now I had the proof. Jenna hadn't just been distant, she had been emotionally cheating on me with Ryan. And what made it worse was that she had been lying to me about it the whole time. She had made a choice, and I had to make mine. I wasn't going to beg her to stay. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking everything could go back to normal. So, I made the decision. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I wanted, but it was something I had to do. I couldn't keep living in a lie. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. Jenna had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I spent the next few days going through the motions, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I had to figure out what came next. I had to figure out how to move forward. There was so much at stake, so much to lose. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was starting to take control of my life again. I started looking at the divorce papers, looking at the future with a sense of finality. Jenna was still in the house, still walking around like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I had changed. The man who had trusted her, the man who had loved her blindly, was gone. And in his place was a man who was ready to move on, who was ready to take back what he had lost. The tension in the house was palpable. Every glance, every word felt like it carried a weight. Jenna knew what was coming. She knew I was done. But she didn't want to let go. She kept trying, kept apologizing, kept begging me to reconsider. She said she loved me, that she had made a mistake. But how could I believe that? How could I believe anything she said after everything that had happened? She had hurt me, betrayed me, and now she wanted me to forgive her. It didn't work like that, not anymore. The trust was gone. And once trust is broken, it can never be fully repaired. So, I made my move. I told her it was over. I told her I couldn't do this anymore. And as the words left my mouth, a part of me felt relief. It wasn't the relief I had expected, but it was relief nonetheless. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life. I was done with the lies, done with the betrayal. I was moving on. And as I walked out of that room, I knew it was the beginning of something new. Something I couldn't have before, something I had to create for myself. The days following our confrontation felt like a blur, but there was no escaping the weight of the decision I had made. Each step I took, every room I entered, felt like a slow descent into a world that no longer made sense. Jenna was still here, still trying to reach out to me, still clinging to the remnants of what we once had, but I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The trust, the bond that had once held us together, had been shattered, and no matter how many times she apologized or promised to change, I couldn't undo what had been done. I had finally seen her for what she was: a stranger, a person who had kept secrets from me, who had emotionally invested in someone else, while I was left in the dark. Her presence in the house was suffocating. It was as if we were both trapped in a limbo, stuck in a space that no longer belonged to either of us. The moments of silence between us were deafening. Every word, every action felt like it was being analyzed, scrutinized under a magnifying glass. Jenna would approach me, her voice soft, pleading, asking if there was a chance to fix things. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything could just go back to how it was. It wasn't about the affair, not entirely. It was about everything, the years of my life that I had given to her, the love and trust I had poured into our marriage, only to watch it all slip away in the blink of an eye. I wasn't angry anymore. At least, not in the way I had been in the past few days. The anger had turned into something else, something deeper, colder. It was the realization that the woman I had loved had chosen someone else, and no amount of apologies could erase that. She had betrayed me, and I had let her. I had let her slip away without even seeing it. The guilt, the shame, it all washed over me in waves. I had trusted her with everything, and in return, she had thrown it all away. As I sat in the living room, the tension thick in the air, I couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. What had I missed? What had I overlooked? There were signs, so many signs, and yet, I had kept pushing them aside. Jenna's late nights, the excuses, the distance between us, how had I allowed it to go on for so long? But what hurt the most wasn't that she had cheated, it was that she had stopped loving me long before I had realized it. She had checked out of our marriage emotionally, and I had been too blind to see it. Jenna kept coming to me, asking for a chance to fix things, but her words felt empty now. She said she was confused, that she didn't know how things had gotten so bad, but I knew better. I knew that this had been going on for months, maybe longer. The way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way she seemed distant and detached. It had all been building up to this. I couldn't ignore it any longer, and I couldn't forgive her, not this time. One evening, she sat down beside me, her voice trembling as she told me how much she regretted what had happened. She said she was sorry, that she had made a mistake, but the words didn't reach me. They felt rehearsed, like something she had been telling herself over and over in her head. It wasn't genuine. It wasn't real. How could it be, after everything? I had seen the way she had been with Ryan, the intimacy they shared, the way she confided in him while pushing me away. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not because she had cheated, but because she had let me believe we were still okay when she had already made her choice. I stood up, the frustration boiling over, and walked toward the door. I couldn't sit there and listen to her anymore. I couldn't hear the words, the excuses, the empty apologies. I had to get out of the house. I had to clear my head, The quiet desperation in her voice as she called my name, asking me to stay, only made it worse. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't stand being in the same room as her. Every time I saw her face, I was reminded of the lies, the betrayal, the emptiness that had consumed our relationship. I went for a drive, not knowing where I was headed, just needing to escape. The streets were familiar, but everything felt foreign now. I passed the places we had gone together, the coffee shop, where we had our first date, the park where we had spent hours talking about our dreams, our future. Those memories, once so full of life and possibility, now felt like a lifetime ago. How could everything have changed so quickly? How could the woman I had trusted, the woman I had married, have turned into someone so different? The drive was long, but it gave me the space I needed to think, to breathe, to process. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't return to that house, to that life, to the woman who had betrayed me. It was over. It had to be. When I finally returned, Jenna was waiting for me. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty, guilt, and regret. I didn't know how to respond. There was nothing left to say. The damage had been done. We were no longer the same people who had once shared a life together. I had changed. She had changed. And there was no fixing it. No going back. I walked past her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I didn't look back. I couldn't. There was nothing left to salvage. I had to move forward. I had to let go of the past and find my way out of this mess. But as I closed the door behind me, a part of me felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. It wasn't the relief of having won, of having made a right decision. It was the relief of finally walking away, of letting go of the pain and betrayal. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the first step toward reclaiming my life. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally taking control. It had been days since I last saw Jenna, and the house felt emptier than I ever imagined it could. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating, and with every moment that passed, I felt a greater sense of finality creeping into my bones. I had made my decision. I had left. But there was still this haunting question in my mind. What now? I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. I couldn't pretend that everything would just magically heal over time. Jenna had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that walking away from her wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about ending the life I thought I knew. The life that had revolved around her, around us. It was all a lie, a facade that I had allowed myself to believe for far too long. Everywhere I went, every place we had once shared, I saw her face, saw the moments we had spent together, the plans we had made. It was impossible to escape it. I couldn't stop replaying the night she admitted everything, the words she spoke, the tears in her eyes. She had said she didn't know how it had gotten so far, that she never meant to hurt me. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. Her remorse didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the fact that she had allowed herself to become emotionally entangled with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. And that was the part that crushed me, the realization that, for months, I had been living a lie. I had been blind to her detachment, to her growing affection for another man, while I kept fooling myself into thinking things were fine. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to make sense of everything. The house was empty, quiet, and cold. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. I had walked away, but I still wasn't sure if I had done the right thing. Could I really leave? Could I really walk away from everything we had? Could I walk away from her? The questions swirled around me, relentless, as I tried to breathe through the confusion, the pain, the betrayal. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been after our first confrontation. The anger had been replaced with a deeper, more painful emotion, betrayal. It wasn't just the affair, it was the slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about her. It was the fact that she had been hiding this from me for so long, that she had felt so disconnected from me that she had turned to someone else for comfort, for support. And that realization gnawed at me constantly. It was as if she had been living two lives, one with me, and one with Ryan, and I had been kept in the dark about it all. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? The guilt, the shame, they weighed on me like a ton of bricks. I had trusted her completely, and she had shattered that trust in the worst possible way. I tried to keep moving forward, tried to focus on anything other than the emptiness that seemed to be taking over my life. Work became a distraction. It was the only thing that didn't feel broken. But even at work, I found myself distracted, caught in the web of thoughts about Jenna, about what we had, about what we lost. I had been married to her for years, and now, I was trying to figure out how to survive in a world where she no longer existed in the way I had known her. The pain of that was unbearable, and as I tried to ignore it, to push it aside, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the loss of the life I had built. The life I had imagined for myself with her. We had built a future together, or so I thought. But now, that future was nothing but a shattered dream. Then came the message. I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't expecting it. But there it was, a text from Jenna. The first had deleted her number, but somehow, she managed to reach me anyway. The message was simple, yet it carried so much weight. Can we talk? I need to see you. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen her in days, and yet, I could feel the pull of her words, the remnants of the life we had shared tugging at me. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment, my finger hovering just above the reply button. What was I supposed to say? What was there left to say? I had made my decision. I had walked away. But the thought of seeing her again, of facing her and the reality of what had happened, terrified me. I had been strong. I had stood my ground. But now, all of those emotions, the anger, the hurt, the confusion came rushing back. What was I supposed to do with all of it? How could I face her again? Was I strong enough to hold on to the resolve I had built? Or would I let her pull me back into the chaos we had left behind? The decision was made. I was going to see her. But this time, things would be different. I had to make sure of it. I couldn't let her control the narrative anymore. I couldn't let her spin her lies, or beg for forgiveness, in the same way she had before. I was done with that. The old me, the one who had tried to fix everything, to make it work, that man was gone. The man standing here now was someone else. Someone who wasn't afraid to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and headed out the door. This wasn't just about closure. It wasn't just about ending things with her. This was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my happiness. No more lies. No more pretending. It was time to face the reality of what had happened and move on. Once and for all. The car ride felt like an eternity. Every mile adding more weight to my thoughts. And the closer I got to her, the heavier my heart became. I had agreed to meet Jenna, to face her once more, but the closer I got to that moment, the more I questioned whether I was truly ready. What was I hoping for? Closure? To hear her apologize again? To somehow find the strength to forgive her? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't keep running from the truth, from the wreckage of everything that had happened. I had already made my decision, but seeing her again would force me to confront the pieces of myself I had tried to bury, the pieces she had shattered. I parked the car outside the cafe, my hands trembling as I turned off the engine. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my mind racing, but I forced myself to step out. I walked through the door, every step heavier than the last. The place was quiet, almost eerily so, but when I saw Jenna sitting at the corner table, I froze. She looked so different. The woman I had known so confident, so sure of herself was now a shadow of that person. Her eyes were puffy from crying. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She looked broken, and for a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. But I quickly squashed it. I couldn't afford to feel pity for her. Not after everything. Not after the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. I took a deep breath and walked toward her, my heart hammering in my chest. When she saw me, her face softened, a small, hesitant smile tugging at her lips. But I didn't smile back. I couldn't. I sat down across from her, my body stiff with tension, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. It felt like we were both waiting for the other to make the first move, to break the silence that hung thick between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "David, I'm so sorry." The words, the same words she had said to me countless times before, felt like a punch to the gut. They were empty now. I had heard them too many times to believe them. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she continued, her eyes welling with tears. "I never wanted things to end like this. I couldn't help it, I had to say something. You didn't mean to hurt me? I repeated, my voice tight, my patience wearing thin. Jenna, you've been hurting me for months. You've been lying to me, sneaking around with Ryan, and now you're sitting here telling me you didn't mean to hurt me? You've already done the damage. There's no taking it back. The words felt heavy as they left my mouth. But they were the truth. And the truth was the only thing left between us. Her face crumpled. And the tears finally spilled over. I know I've messed up, David, she said, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But please, please know that I never wanted to lose you. I wanted to scream. To tell her how much she had destroyed. To make her feel the depth of the hurt she had caused. But I didn't. I couldn't let my emotions take control. I had to stay calm. I had to remind myself that this was the end. That no matter how many times she apologized, no matter how much she regretted it now, it didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the fact that she had already chosen Ryan. That she had already made her decision. I had been left behind, in the dark, while she played out her own little drama behind my back. You chose him, Jenna, I said, my voice low but firm. You chose to be with him emotionally, to confide in him, to share things with him that should have been mine. And now you're sitting here telling me you regret it. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that we can fix this, that everything can just go back to the way it was. The truth is, we've both changed. And what we had, it's gone. It's gone, and there's no going back. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. And for a long time, Jenna didn't say anything. Her gaze dropped to the table, her hands shaking as she wiped away the tears. I watched her, but I didn't feel the same attachment I once had. I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel love. I just felt numb. And that was worse than anything else, because it meant I had already moved on. I stood up, pushing the chair back with more force than I intended. And Jenna looked up at me, her face a mixture of sadness and guilt. David, please, she said, her voice breaking. Don't walk away from me. I know I've messed up, but I love you. I'm sorry for everything. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You love me? You don't even know what love is anymore. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have turned to someone else, someone who wasn't me, for comfort. You wouldn't have kept secrets from me. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't betray. And you did both. I took one last look at her, the woman I had once trusted with my heart, the woman who had broken me beyond repair. The woman who was no longer the woman I had married. She was a stranger, someone I couldn't recognize. Someone I couldn't bring myself to care about anymore. And with that, I turned and walked away, my heart heavier than it had ever been, but also somehow lighter, as though I had finally freed myself from the chains of the past. As I stepped out into the cold air, I felt the weight of the finality pressing down on me. It was over. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't know what I expected when I left that cafe. The weight of the final words I'd spoken to Jenna hung heavy on my shoulders, but the sense of relief that followed was almost disorienting. There was no sense of victory in walking away from her. There was no satisfaction in knowing that I had made the right decision. I just felt empty. For the first time in years, I didn't know who I was without her. And that truth scared me more than anything. She had been my world, the person I built everything with. And now that world had come crashing down. The woman I once trusted had betrayed me, and yet, I was still carrying the pieces of that trust with me, unsure of what to do with them. The night was dark, colder than I had realized, and as I stood in the parking lot staring at the car in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me was permanently broken. I wanted to feel anger, to feel satisfaction that I was finally taking control of my life. But I didn't. I felt numb. My emotions, once so fierce, had dulled to a point where I wasn't sure what I felt anymore. The drive back home was mechanical. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but my mind was elsewhere. It wasn't about Jenna anymore. It wasn't about her apology or her regret, it was about me. It was about what came next, what kind of man I would be after all of this. When I finally got home, I didn't know what to do. The house felt empty, not because it was devoid of life, but because it was so full of memories I didn't want to face but couldn't avoid. The walls that once felt like home now felt like a prison. I sat in the living room, staring at the space we had shared for so long, and the silence was deafening. This place, this life, was no longer mine. The woman who had once been my partner, my confidant, was now someone I barely recognized. She wasn't just emotionally unavailable, she was emotionally invested elsewhere, and I had been too blind to see it. I had thought that walking away from her would bring me peace, that leaving the past behind would free me. But all it did was force me to face the truth that I had been living in a lie, the truth that I had been chasing a version of her, a version of our relationship that no longer existed. And it hit me harder than I had expected. The betrayal wasn't just about her cheating on me. It wasn't just about the emotional affair she had carried on with Ryan. It was about everything that had led up to it, the little things I had ignored, the growing distance between us, the intimacy we had once shared, now long gone. I had let it slip away without even realizing it. And now, with every passing second, it felt like the weight of that loss was crushing me. I walked upstairs, but it felt like I was moving through a dream. The house felt foreign, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. I couldn't even bring myself to look at the bed we had shared for so many years. It was no longer a place of comfort, it was a reminder of everything I had lost. My hands clenched into fists, but there was no release. There was no outlet for the rage, the hurt, the confusion that churned inside me. I felt like a shell of the person I once was, and I wasn't sure how to get back to the man I used to be, the man who trusted, the man who loved. I wasn't sure if that man still existed. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment, I hesitated. It was a text from Jenna. I didn't even have to read it to know what it would say. "Can we talk?" It probably said, or maybe, "I'm sorry." But the truth was, I didn't need to read it. I didn't need to hear any more apologies, any more empty promises. What had happened between us was over, and no amount of words could change that. I had already given everything I could to this marriage, to this woman, and it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I put the phone down and stared at the wall, the silence pressing in from every side. I knew what had to be done next. The decision I'd made earlier to walk away was the right one. But in that moment, I realized something that terrified me even more than the anger, than the heartbreak. I realized that walking away from her was just the beginning. It wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about starting over, about rebuilding a life. I didn't even know how to live. I had to learn how to be alone again. I had to learn how to trust myself, to find peace without relying on someone else. It was going to be hard, it was going to take time, but I couldn't live in the past anymore. I couldn't keep letting it define me. The tears I had been holding back all night finally spilled over, but they weren't for Jenna. They weren't even for the loss of the marriage. They were for the loss of myself. The man I thought I had been, the man who had once believed in love and in trust, had been destroyed. And as I wiped my eyes, I knew there was only one way forward. I had to find myself again. I had to take control. I had to build a life without her. I wasn't sure what that life would look like, but I knew it was the only way I could truly move on. The hardest part was over. I had made my choice. Now, it was time to live with it. The days after I left felt like an endless stream of time that blurred into one long, sleepless night. The weight of the decision had sunk deep into my chest, a dull ache I couldn't shake, but there was no going back. I knew that. Jenna had pushed me to a point where the life we had built was irreparably broken. Every time I closed my eyes, the memories of her, of us, would flood my mind, and it was like I was drowning in them. I couldn't escape the images of what had been, and what could never be again. It was impossible to erase the years we'd spent together, to erase the trust I'd once given her, the love I'd once believed in so fiercely. But with each passing day, that feeling of suffocation faded. Slowly, steadily, I began to realize something. I was free. I had taken back control of my life, even though it didn't feel like it. There were moments when the darkness would creep in, when the loneliness would threaten to swallow me whole, but I fought through it. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without feeling the weight of the lies pressing down on me. I didn't have to live in the constant shadow of suspicion anymore. I didn't have to wonder where she was, who she was with, or whether she was telling me the truth. For the first time in months, I could just exist. And that was something I had long forgotten how to do. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to rebuild. I focused on myself, on what made me happy, on the things I had neglected over the years. I started exercising again, something I hadn't done in so long. I found solace in the simple things, walking outside in the fresh air, feeling the sun on my skin. The weight of the grief I had been carrying began to lift, and with it came a sense of clarity I hadn't had in years. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a marriage that had long since died. But now, I could finally let go. And that felt like freedom. At first, I didn't know how to deal with the aftermath. The guilt, the anger, the heartbreak, it all swirled inside me, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. I would go to bed at night, feeling like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. And I would wake up, empty, exhausted, unsure of what to do next. But as time went on, something started to shift. I realized that I couldn't keep letting the past define me. I couldn't let the pain of what had happened keep me locked in a prison of my own making. I had to forgive myself for what had happened, for not seeing the signs, for not knowing what was happening right in front of me. And I had to accept that sometimes things just don't work out, no matter how much you want them to. I started to reconnect with people I had neglected while I was focused on the mess that had been my marriage. I called old friends, the ones I had pushed away when I became too consumed with Jenna and our life together. They welcomed me back, without judgment, and slowly, I began to rebuild the relationships I had lost. It was strange, in a way like learning to walk again, but I did it. I learned how to trust people again, how to let them in, and I began to realize that there was a world out there beyond the one I had shared with Jenna. A world that still had the potential for happiness. A world that didn't need to be defined by betrayal. And then, just when I thought I had finally gotten my life back on track, Sarah entered the picture. At first, I didn't even recognize it for what it was. A chance encounter, a casual conversation. She was kind, warm, and unexpectedly easy to talk to. She didn't know my story, didn't know the heartbreak I had gone through, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a broken man. It was as though I could finally just be me again, without the baggage, without the weight of everything that had happened. There was something about her, a calmness, a warmth that made me feel alive again. And for the first time since Jenna, I allowed myself to feel something other than pain. We started talking more, meeting for coffee, going for walks. She was patient with me, never pushing me to open up about my past if I wasn't ready. But slowly, I started to trust her. Slowly, I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. I wasn't sure I was ready for another relationship, not yet. But there was something about Sarah that made me think I might be able to try. For the first time in a long time, I could see the possibility of a future that wasn't shadowed by betrayal and heartbreak. I had to take it slow. I had to make sure that I wasn't jumping into something just to fill the emptiness. Jenna had left. But as I spent more time with Sarah, I began to feel the weight of the past lifting. It wasn't that I was forgetting Jenna or the pain she had caused me, it was that I was learning to live with it, to accept it as a part of who I was, but not the whole of who I was. I wasn't defined by my past, and I didn't have to be defined by my mistakes. Months passed, and the relationship with Sarah grew. We talked about everything, our pasts, our hopes, our fears, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly seen. She listened, without judgment, without trying to fix me. She simply accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. And in return, I did the same for her. I didn't rush things. I didn't need to. I had learned the hard way that love wasn't something you could force. It was something you had to let grow, naturally, in its own time. And with Sarah, it was growing, steadily, without the pressure of expectations or the baggage of my past. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, I realized something that surprised me. I was happy. I was truly happy. The pain of my past still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. I had let go of what I couldn't change, and in doing so, I had found peace. I had found a way to move forward, not despite my past, but with it, learning from it, growing from it. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally living the life I was meant to live. And then, one day, as I stood in front of Sarah, the woman who had slowly but surely healed the wounds of my past, I realized that I had found something better than I had ever expected, a second chance. A chance to love again, to trust again, and to build a future that was mine. A future that was no longer defined by betrayal, but by growth, by acceptance, by healing. As I asked Sarah to spend the rest of her life with me, I didn't think about the mistakes I had made, or the heartbreak I had endured. I thought about how far I had come, how much I had grown. And I realized in that moment that sometimes the greatest pain leads to the greatest joy. That through the fire, we can become something stronger, something better. And I knew, with certainty, that the future ahead of me was brighter than anything I could have ever imagined. You won't believe how this ends. The final twist will leave you questioning everything. Did he make the right choice? Was the betrayal worth walking away from? Hit that comment section now, tell me your thoughts, because this is one ending you won't forget. The lesson here is clear: no matter how deeply we've been hurt, we must find the strength to move forward. Betrayal, heartache, and pain are inevitable in life, but they don't define us. We control how we respond and how we rebuild. In America, where resilience is a core value, it's essential to remember that after loss, we can regain control of our lives. Take the time to heal, but don't stay stuck in the past. Embrace change, seek growth, and trust that new opportunities will emerge. Life doesn't wait, and neither should we. Keep moving forward,